Anastasia Bale got out of the carriage and ordered the poor man to escort her. He replied that he worked like a dog to track her down. The man was very interested and asked why she needed it. The guy put a sword on his shoulder and ordered him to keep his mouth shut and show the way. "Here she is!" The poor man pointed to a little girl who was playing with a piece of wood and a peg sitting on the ground near the house in the rain. "The lady can't even imagine how much effort it took me to track her down. The one who calls herself her mother protects her well," the poor man cried. They threw a bag at his feet. There was a lot of gold there and the man was happy about it. For this, he had to take all the information with him to the grave. The girl was very beautiful with golden curly hair. Beautiful camellia, a flower among the mud. A gem born in a brothel. Anastasia approached her and asked the girl what she was doing here, and all alone in the rain. The girl replied that her mother was busy for now. This brought a smile to the woman's face, and she asked the girl, "You must be Leah, right?" The girl was surprised that the woman knew her name. Then Anastasia told her the story. One day, a pregnant girl of incredible beauty came here in search of refuge. Having no roof over her head, she knocked on every door, begging for a piece of bread. She slept among criminals and homeless people, and was always afraid that she was being followed. A few months later, she gave birth to a baby right on the street. Not like all the rot of the slums, an angel with emerald eyes and golden hair. When winter came, the child fell ill from the unforgiving cold and was penniless. For the first time in her entire life, his mother sold her body to the town doctor. And so 12 years later, Anastasia told the girl that her mother was terminally ill. The little girl was very scared and ran towards the house. Anastasia's servant grabbed her and took her in his arms. She was too light for a 12-year-old girl. He told the lady about this. And Anastasia replied that there was no time to talk now, and she ordered him to take people and clean up here. The guy asked, "So what happened to her mom?" And the lady replied, "What do you think? What happens to fire when it rains?" And she really hoped that the girl's mother would not survive. And they left, taking Leah. What a pleasant smell, so soft. "Am I in heaven?" thought the little girl. And suddenly she jumped up on the bed, opening her eyes. She was in a luxurious room on a huge, soft bed. The girl was scared when she saw the maid, and I asked her if they were in heaven. The girl smiled and said that she must be very hungry. The food on the tray looked very appetizing. But the girl did not eat. She was very worried about her mother. She asked the maid what was wrong with her mother. The girl said that her beautiful aunt told her that her mother was sick, and she wanted to know what was wrong with her. She also didn't know where they were now. The maid thought that the girl was not hungry since she did not eat. But this was not so. She was just very worried about her mother. And then she asked where that beautiful aunt was. The girl replied that the lady would come as soon as the girl had eaten and bought herself. Leah didn't understand why she needed to swim, but in fact, a terrible stench emanated from her. Suddenly, the door to the room opened and a blonde boy ran into it. He scolded the maid for not calling him as soon as Leah woke up. The boy greeted Camellia and sat down next to her on the bed. He introduced himself as Kieran Bale. Leah cowered in fear. Kieran asked not to be afraid of him, because he turns 15 this year and is only 3 years older than her. Leah curled up into a ball and was still shaking. She asked to let her go to her mother because she didn't even warn her and she would be very worried. The guy understood her sadness. "You must miss her a lot," he asked Leah. Then Kieran asked the maid Betty where Leah's mother was. Betty sighed sadly, but she said that the madam would inform them about this, and her task was only to feed and bathe Leah. Then the girl remembered that she needed to take a bath. She felt embarrassed to be so dirty in front of Kieran. He was so beautiful and clean. And Betty then offered her something to eat after the bath. She was very kind to the girl, and Betty promised to help her with everything when Leah said she didn't know how to bathe. Suddenly, Kieran coughed and stained Leah's bed with blood. The girl was scared, and Betty screamed to call the doctor. Leah asked her if he would die. Betty didn't expect such a question, but answered that he would be fine. He probably just walked a lot in the rain. And they went to the bathroom. After bathing and changing clothes, the girl and Betty approached the mistress's room. Upon entering, Leah said hello and thanked her for the food. The lady noted that the girl looked much better after tidying herself up, but Leah still asked to see her mother. Then Mrs. Anastasia asked her to come to her. When Leah sat down next to her, the lady said that the girl would no longer be able to see her mother. After all, she committed a crime and stole something very expensive and very important to her that could never be returned. The girl did not believe it, and tears flowed from her eyes. Leah said she would find the item, maybe it just got lost. After all, her mother is not a thief. Then Anastasia called Betty. The maid brought her a box of scissors. The mistress said that from now on Leah is Camelius Bale, and cut off her beautiful hair. When Leah objected, Anastasia said, "If you vow to live like Camelius from today, I promise that nothing will happen to you and your mother." As Leah sat on her bed and cried, Betty said that her mother would not be punished, she would just get treatment. And the lady is not as evil as she might think. But the girl must learn to obey. After all, this is the only way to save Laura. Leah turned around and asked if Betty knew her mother. The maid replied that of course she knew. "After all, this is your father's house," Betty said, and showed Leah to his portrait on the wall. They were very similar to him. Hair, eyes. And she remembered her mother's words standing in front of the mirror. "Camelia, from your father you got beautiful light honey hair and bewitching emerald eyes. You are his copy," Mom always said. Leah looked at her reflection in the glass cabinet and had only one question in her head. "Mom, what's going on?" The maids worked near the palace. They discussed the child who had arrived with the mistress. They say that he is the illegitimate son of the Marquis. But why would the lady bring him into the house? After all, she already has a son, Mr. Kieran. But in secret, Mr. Kieran is ill, and if the aristocrats find out about this, they will take up arms against the Bale house. She makes it clear to them that even if something happens to Kieran, the House of Bale will still be as powerful in the hands of another successor. When the maids saw Camelius with Betty on the street, everyone noticed his complete resemblance to Kieran. But only they had a question whether it was a boy. Leah complained to Betty that she couldn't remember the road on such a huge territory of the palace, calling it a meme. But Betty scolded him for this treatment. She is just a servant for him. And now he is Bale, the son of the Marquis Gillard, and must learn to behave like an aristocrat. His lessons will take place in Mr. Kieran's room. Then Leah asked Betty if she thought her mistress would let her go home to her mother, if she did everything as they said. Betty replied that the lady was a man of her word, and the Marquis will return soon. He has sorted out the work in the north, and he is already looking forward to seeing him, Camelius Bale. Leah was also interested. This place was very different from the slums. It was very beautiful here. But the beautiful silence was broken by shots, and Leah noticed a handsome guy with dark hair. "Elias, finally you left the room. You can't imagine how worried I was." Kieran suddenly shouted and rushed to hug his new brother. Kieran introduced Elias as his little brother to that tall guy, Claude. Claude motioned for Elias to cover his ears and shoot into the sky at the birds. The subtle aroma of lavender was overwhelmed by the pungent smell of gunpowder. "This place is full of beautiful but deadly things," Leah thought. "I see you are not at all worried by the sudden appearance of your brother," Claude asked Kieran, who was playing with a real gun in the room. When the guy asked if he should be alarmed, Claude replied that his brother was proof of his father's deception. Kieran responded by saying that deception has its price, and his brother Elias has already sacrificed a lot for this. In general, he was glad that he now had a younger brother, and Claude has nothing to worry about. Two brothers, they were so similar but completely different at heart. And yet they looked like two peas in a pod, Claude thought, watching Elias play in the yard from the window of the room. During lunch, Kieran told his brother that he should eat more. Otherwise, he had lost a lot of weight. He sincerely worried about him. Mrs. Anastasia asked Elias how his classes were going. If he studies well, he will be the best in the academy, just like his brother Kieran. Kieran told his mother that it had only been a week since classes started and Elias was working hard. And in recent days he had slept little due to the constant shooting of Mr. Claude. When Mrs. Anastasia went to her room, Kieran told about Claude. They met at the academy. Claude is the heir to the House of Ihar, Guardians of the North. Even though they are the same age and study together at the academy, he shows himself in many ways. Leah thought he was so mesmerizing but scary at the same time. Kieran offered to go hunting with them next time. Leah said that he never even held a musket. "Brother, you have to start somewhere." Leah thought her brother was too cute. Suddenly, the door opened, a maid ran in and announced that the Marquis had returned. Kieran was very happy about this. The Marquis got out of the carriage and hugged his wife. The boys came out to meet him. Kieran hugged his father, and Leah thought it must be her father. He called the boy to him, looked into his eyes, hugged him tightly and said, "Welcome home, Camelius." "I heard it was a girl." "We don't need a girl. Do you think a girl can behave like a boy?" the Marquise asked his wife. She told him that this was not forever, only until Kieran recovered, and she asked to think of her as a means of maintaining the reputation of the house. The guy said it was heartless of her to make the girls suffer for the sake of their reputation. Anastasia replied that he is heartless here. After all, it was he who shared the bed with the maid. She then thought that this was a temporary hobby that would quickly get boring. But then with Kieran's first steps, her belly also began to grow. The whole house and all the servants followed her orders in case she gave birth to a boy. The day Kieran fell, it was as if the heavens had fallen. The Marquis kicked the girl out of the palace, and since then their son has been suffering. Anastasia will never be able to forget about this. The Marquis asked what happened to Leah's mother. Anastasia replied that she was probably dead or crazy. Her husband said that she was pushing herself too hard. Kieran may be weak, but no one would dare look down on House Bale. Anastasia replied that this was her son and she would not stand aside and watch. Anastasia said that she dreams about the woman responsible for Kieran's condition from time to time. It's hard to bear. And his wife asked him not to forget what she had done. Gilliard swore to the House of Bale that he would never forgive her. When Anastasia's friends and girls Leah's age gathered together, they were all in love with Claude. One of them noticed that he was looking at someone. The girls asked Anastasia who it was, catching snow with his mouth on the street, and she told the maid to take Laius to his chambers, since the street was still too dangerous for him. Her friends realized that this was the mistress's son who was being treated in isolation, and one of the girls asked the lady, "Is he really a boy?" Anastasia shuddered at the unexpected question, but the girl said that he was just so handsome that everyone probably confuses him with a girl. "Brother, it's time for me to go to class," Laius shouted, breaking free. "You're wrong, Master Theodore arrives tomorrow morning," Kieran answered him. "And now Mr. Claude will teach you to shoot," Kieran said and pulled him by the hand. Claude was already standing, taking aim, with a gun. Claude noticed Laius and asked him why he was trying the snow then. Laius replied that he was just curious. Then Claude gave him a gun and helped him aim. Suddenly, after the shot, the servants shouted that Monsieur Claude was wounded and they needed to call a doctor. The guy replied that everything was fine. He just burned his hand on the barrel of the gun. Laius cried because Claude got burned. The guy was surprised by this reaction. Then he asked the boy why he was crying because it was not him who was hurt. And Laius just silently rolled a snowball and put it on his burnt hand. Tears flowed down his cheeks and the snow melted and flowed from Claude's hand. The thoughts in the kid's head were that he had injured the nobleman. What will he do to him for this? Hit him, flog him, or maybe execute him? What will Mrs. Anastasia say? He asked for forgiveness and mentally asked his mother to help. A girl ran up and, pushing Laius away, offered her help to Claude and gave her a handkerchief. The girl yelled at the boy for hurting Mr. Claude and how dangerous it was. Kieran stood up for his brother for raising her voice. Kieran suggested that Laius ask Mr. Claude for forgiveness. When he did this, Claude threw the handkerchief into the snow and asked him to do it again. Laius didn't understand whether he needed to apologize again, and Claude smiled and told him to apply the snow again, because it helps much more than a scarf. Mistress Anastasia hit Laius on the cheek so hard that he fell to the floor. She screamed that he had forgotten his role to simply exist. And not to suck up to the prince and Mr. Claude, thinking that if they like you, you can be whoever you want. If you involve Kieran in something like this again, I will not be so merciful. Your task is just to live. The lady finished. What a show, thought Claude, walking past the room along the corridor. He stood there for a moment thinking and walked away. Luce sat outside in the snow under the starry sky and cried, remembering his mother. Suddenly, Claude came up to him, rolled a snowball, and applied it to his tears. When Laius asked what he was doing, Claude replied, "So what does it feel like?" shook the snow off his hands and left. The kid sat there, not understanding what it was. "If you want to raise her like a boy, then you must respect her, Anastasia," the Marquise told his wife. He shamed her for hitting their child. Anastasia said that she would not have to punish him if he did not make mistakes, and she would have done the same to Kieran if he had disgraced their name. Gilliard asked if Laius had disgraced their name, and she replied that weakness begets weakness when mistakes get away with, and someone else is disgracing their family. With these words, the Marquis slammed the door. Walking down the corridor, he asked the servant how things were going with the search for Leah's mother. He was told that she had left Lower. Some say that she is obsessed with finding her daughter, while others say that she is simply left without money. The Marquis replied that there was no need to report gossip, and he told the servant that it turned out that they had found a diamond mine in the neutral territory of the north, and if not for the intervention of the emperor, the land would already have belonged to Duke Ihar. The servant replied that in this case, a war would begin. Gilead continued that conspirators were already gathering around Gaior. Levin Sergio, king of Gaior. If they help him in Del Casa, then he will be indebted to them. Their conversation was interrupted by the news that Kieran was in trouble. A mother cried over her sick son's bed. Gilead asked the doctor to report on the situation. He said that the treatment did not bring any results. Anastasia screamed to find another medicine, and the doctor replied that the best doctors in the empire were working on the treatment, but the boy's lungs were gradually failing. Claude suggested sending him to the neutral territory of the north, to Gaior. There is a doctor there named Schmidt. They call him the Almighty Healer. Gilead said that Gaior bordered Del Casa to the south, and he and Kieran could go north to look for Schmidt. And Claude said that Schmidt is the court physician of Sergio's house, and besides, he owed it to his father. Claude also felt very sorry for Kieran. When Claude left Kieran's room, he noticed Leah standing in the hallway. The guy thought it was very strange that he couldn't visit his brother without permission. Leus bowed when he saw Claude, and he passed by, stopped and asked how old he was. Laius wondered why he did this, but answered that it was 12. Claude asked if he went to the academy, and he replied that he had private lessons. Then Claude said that they would meet in 4 years at the academy. 4 years later, Leah was beautiful, but she was still Leus. Her chest was bandaged, she was 16. Betty reminded Leah that it was time for her to get her hair cut. Her hair grew longer during her mistress's absence, and when the mistress returns, she will punish everyone for this. All the castle servants paid attention to Leah. Betty said they were just jealous of her beauty. Leah was also wondering how Kieran was doing. 4 winters have passed since Kieran left for the north in search of treatment. King Gaiora invited him to study in the north throughout his treatment. Gilead was furious. He could not come to terms with the fact that his son was being held hostage, and Anastasia was merciless and forbade Leah to communicate with her brother and Claude. Leah hoped Kieran would recover before he came back and she could move back in with her mum. The servant told Laius that they had come to him from the academy. The guests asked Gilead to send his youngest son to the academy. He replied that his wife, who is now away, is taking care of the children's education. The man informed the Marquis that House Ilhar hoped to see Camillus at the academy as soon as possible. Claude wants to see me? Camillus thought. The father replied that then he would need a room and a servant. The professor replied that they would provide him with a room, and the presence of servants was contrary to the rules of the academy. Master Theodore said that Laius had already surpassed his graduates. This was another reason to nurture this talent at the academy. When Laius heard the professor's words that his father would be able to visit him in the capital, he began to beg his father to let him go to the academy. The boy promised to study well and not disgrace the Bale House. Then the father agreed and promised to discuss with Anastasia his training and housing near the academy. Leah ran along the road excitedly, thinking that her mother was somewhere in the capital and that she would soon be able to find her. I wonder if she's bored. Has she forgotten about her daughter? She certainly never would have thought that her daughter would become part of the Bale House. Mom always smiled when they were together, and they never had secrets from each other. It was good with Mom. You could talk about everything and didn't have to hide. Leah decided that the academy in the capital was her chance to return to her past life. Suddenly, Camillus was called out by a man. He was from the academy. He insinuated that Leus was, in fact, the wrong gender, and he warned that people might not be as kind to people like him. Pippi, Leah's maid, was very worried that Leus would leave for the capital without her. He reassured her that his parents would definitely not let him go without her. Pippi was happy. Leus invited Pippi to choose an outfit for him in the capital. She was glad because she had dreamed about this for a long time, and Leah herself thought only that she would find her mother in the capital. A few days later, Leah saw the imperial capital of Ether from a carriage window. His father asked him if it was true that he had never left Lower. He replied that my mother said it was too dangerous there. She was right, the capital was not famous for its safety, but Dad said that with the right company, it is full of delight. Gilead told Leus that the imperial tailor worked in this building, and he had been asked to work on its uniform. They were about to go in when suddenly the prince, Wade von Weise, called out to them. He hugged Leus and said that his father couldn't wait to see him. Leos was very surprised by this but told his father that everything was fine. And the prince sees him off. Wade joked that it's been 4 years and he's still just as skinny. The last time they saw each other was when Claude got burned by a gun because of him. Wade said that at the academy everyone only talks about Leos and he is now famous. Then Leos became interested in what exactly they were saying about him. And Wade replied that the younger Bale, who had never been seen in public, had finally appeared in the capital. In any case, Leos was a wonderful child according to the prince, but now, to his surprise, he has become very feminine. When they entered the tailor's room, he had a client and he said that he was busy now, since His Majesty had not made an appointment. Wade sat down on the sofa. He said he was just bringing a lost client to him. Then he turned to Leos to see who was at the tailor. It was Claude. Buttoning up his shirt, he told Leos that he hadn't changed at all. And looking into his eyes, he whispered, "Hello, Camillus." When the tailor took Lewis's measurements, Claude was still sitting on the sofa. The tailor asked Leos to undress so that the measurements could be more accurate. Leah asked for a screen, and when she took off her clothes, the tailor realized that there was a girl in front of him. He offered her another shirt that would hide everything she needed. When Camillus came out from behind the screen, the prince immediately invited him to visit him. Leah had only one question in her head. When will this all end? Claude and Wade mounted their horses. Leos sat with Claude, and the prince did not like it very much. Claude said it was for his safety because the prince was a bad horseman. Leos saw the imperial palace for the first time, and when he was invited to the imperial banquet, he said that this place was too wonderful for him. Claude said to this that Mr. Leos is still a flatterer, and His Majesty is too gullible. This offended Leos very much, and Wade said that was great. After all, he loves people who admire him. Then Claude blocked the prince's path and asked him to control himself. Claude reminded him that this had already happened to the son of the Earl of Sheringham, and what it led to. Wade then asked if he thought he had seduced the younger Sheringham. To this, Claude replied that it was better to be careful, so that there were no misunderstandings. And then there's the fact that Camillus is too beautiful for his own good. Wade asked Camillus not to take everything to heart, since Claude only wanted to hurt him, and Leos told Claude that he was not a flatterer. But he simply always tries to be reasonable no matter where he is and with whom, and without benefiting from it. And thanking Monsieur Claude, Leos ran away to the palace. The next day, while having breakfast in the same campaign, the prince asked Leos if he had a bride in mind to marry. To this he replied that his brother should marry first, and the prince announced that Kieran would marry his sister. Leos was sad that he would not be invited to his brother's wedding. Claude told Wade that Mistress Anastasia had not returned yet, and therefore he did not know about his brother's wedding. Leos was grateful for his support, and looking into Leos's eyes, Claude said, "I look forward to the day when we get closer, Camillus Bale. I'm looking forward to it." When Camillus left, Claude asked the prince about him. Claude hinted that he seemed to like Leos, to which Wade replied it doesn't matter whether they are men or women, as long as they are beautiful, he will have them. That's why he liked Claude and Kieran. Wade said that Leos could become Kieran's replacement in society, but in the end, he would still become his property. While the friends were going to the banquet, the prince said that he had already refused many girls, and it seemed that His Majesty was seriously aiming to find him a wife. Claude asked what about the Marquise Shelby's daughter, but Wade was outraged that it was intended for Claude, and everyone knows about their engagement. Claude became upset when he remembered the engagement. Leos had a stomachache and was allowed not to go to the banquet and stay at home. Then Leah took off her uncomfortable clothes and stayed in her shirt. She took a jar of sweets and sat on the window to watch the starry sky and breathe fresh air. Leah thought that her mother was somewhere there, outside the castle walls. She really wanted to see her and was wondering if her mother would recognize her. But suddenly she heard a conversation. The voices were very familiar to her. "I heard that Princess Rosina and Mr. Kieran are due to get engaged next month. We should be next, what do you think?" It was Marilyn Shelby's voice. Claude told her that her father would benefit more if she became engaged to someone who was truly ready for marriage. The girl asked if he was joking. To this, the guy replied that there are enough good men in the Empire, and most of them are ready to kill just for one glance. But Marilyn replied that none of them could compare with him. She thanked him for his company and said that she would wait for the next dance with him and left. Watching this, Leos felt embarrassed and wanted to hide and close the window, but the candies spilled out of the jar and fell right on Claude. Leos got scared and closed the window. He thought that Claude would not look for his room and enter him. He was embarrassed by what he heard, but it happened by accident. He also dropped candy on him. Claude entered Lius's room and asked if he really thought he wouldn't find him. Claude asked why he eats sweets if his stomach hurts. Lius said he needed to eat some sweets to overcome the taste of the medicine. Then Claude asked him to come and sit next to him on the sofa. Leah didn't want to approach because she was afraid that he had noticed something. Claude still insisted that he come over and say that he wanted to check something. All he wanted to say was that it was better to be careful with Prince Wade. The prince is a connoisseur of beauty, and he doesn't care who's in front of him. Men, women, nobles, or peasants, these words mean nothing to him. Don't smile too much around him and keep your distance, Claude told Lius. Your voice is too charming, it can further stir up the prince's interest, Claude continued, to which Lius asked if he was jealous. Leah herself didn't understand how she asked, "If the prince likes everything beautiful, then why don't you worry about yourself, Monsieur Claude?" "And why?" asked Claude. "Because you are the most beautiful person I have ever seen," Leah said and quickly ran away, saying that she was just about to take a shower. Claude sat thoughtfully and then asked, "You made me your little toy, didn't you?" Finding Leah's shirt, he inhaled the scent of lavender. Snow in spring. After 4 years, Kieran never got used to it. Sitting in the room with him was his friend Ian Sergio, the third prince of Gyora. Kieran wrote a letter and asked Ian to deliver it. The prince was surprised why the guy didn't ask his mother to deliver him to Leah, because she was going there. The guy replied that he had already sent letters to Leah many times, but had never received answers to them. Ian realized that Mrs. Anastasia did not want him and his sister to communicate. Then the prince remembered how Kieran had often boasted about his sister, who was as beautiful as an angel. Therefore, he agreed to deliver the letter to her personally. Kieran wanted to warn him that things were not so simple with Leah, but Ian ran away too quickly, and his mother came into his room. She realized that he had a prince. Madame Anastasia said that it was certainly good that she and the prince had become friends, but we should not forget that Ian was from an enemy family, and you shouldn't get too close to him. Then Kieran decided to go to the library. The lady was offended that lately he had been avoiding her more and more often. The guy replied that he was just looking forward to returning home. A few days later, at the palace, Lius and Pippi asked Betty to go to town. She warned them that on the streets of Ether, attacks on women, especially noble women, had become more frequent. And although Lius is a guy, at first glance he can still be mistaken for a girl. But Lius and Pippi did not listen to her, but were already running to the carriage. The girl's mother begged Prince Wade to punish the criminal who attacked Marilyn. He said that the emperor had personally instructed the Imperial Guard to hunt down the culprit. When Wade and Claude went outside, they discussed how the criminal really only attacks noble girls. There are clues that indicate he is part of a revolutionary faction that wants to end the empire. This means he will be apprehended quickly. Claude told Wade that his job was to keep Marilyn company. The prince was again indignant that this was not his beloved. Then Claude said goodbye and left. Driving through the city in a car, Claude noticed Lius and remembered how he spilled candy on him. And Leah also noticed him, freezing in place. Phoebe was happy to be here in the store with Lius. She thought that they had come for a fountain pen that the gentleman liked. But Leah surprised her by saying that she needed a dress. Pippi promised to choose the best dress for the beautiful Leah. Leah decided to buy 5 dresses. When Leah, still pretending to be Lius, was looking at the hats, someone called her Camellia. She saw a guy in a white uniform and told him that he was mistaken. But he was sure that this was Kieran Bale's sister. Lius insisted that he was mistaken, but the guy was struck by their similarity. Then Lius asked who he was, and the guy replied that he was her friend and wanted to join her over a portion of luxurious fruit sorbet. Lius agreed. When they were sitting in the cafe, the prince felt stuffy and wanted to sit on the terrace. But Lius objected since his clothes with the Gyora banner were too conspicuous. Ian replied that his clothes were conspicuous, obviously not as much as pretending to be a man. Lius protested that he was really a man, and Lius asked how his brother was doing there and how he was feeling. Ian replied that it was good, but he had been waiting for news from his sister for a long time. As it turned out, his relative did not answer a single letter. Lius was surprised because he had never received letters from his brother. Ian said he knew they weren't delivered. But Kieran wrote to his dear sister every month. But he never received any answers from her. That's why he asked for help. "The only way to make me leave is to stop pretending, Camellia," said the prince. but Laius insisted that his name was Camillus. Then Ian said that Kieran would soon return to Corsair, and he would be able to return the long-awaited answer to him personally. And he gave him the envelope in his hands. Leah held the envelope in her hands and wondered what would happen to her if her brother recovered and returned home. Will she return to Camelia's life? Mr. Ian really liked Leah and asked permission to invite her to Gayor. He really hoped to meet her at home like Camelia, and kissed her hand. Sitting over the response letter, Leah wondered where to start. Betty asked why she bought 5 dresses for Pee-Pee. I also ate dessert with a foreigner. Betty was worried. Because you need to be more careful with strangers, and even more so after a criminal appeared who attacked Marilyn Shelby. Leah decided to take a moment and ask how Mrs. Anastasia found her then, 4 years ago. After all, the capital is so big she couldn't have found it by chance. Betty replied that one of the servants had met Laura before. Leah asked who exactly, and Betty said that the lady sent him away. Then Leah asked why this happened to her. Betty replied that the lady was always concerned about Kieran's poor health and that fingers were pointed at him, and everyone around was discussing other possible heirs. Relatives began to put pressure on the lady to adopt one of their sons, but she knew that then her son would not survive even if he recovered. After all, their plans were clear. This is what brought her to Leah. Leah admitted to Betty that Kieran would soon return and she would no longer be needed. And then she will go in search of her mother. When Leah was again swimming in her clothes in the pool, she thought about the fact that she so wanted to get out of here. But at the same time, something was holding her here. Lying on her back in the water, she noticed someone's gaze on her. It was Claude. He sat near the pool and did not take his eyes off her. Then Laius came out of the water and asked Claude what he was doing here. He said that he mixed up the dates when Kieran arrives. But in fact, he knew that it was not today. And so Claude took off his shirt and said that he wanted to swim with Laius and this would be their first swim together. Laius wanted to leave, but Claude grabbed his hand and pulled him into the water. Coming out of the water, Leah was worried that he might see something through her wet shirt, and she wrapped herself in a towel. Claude lay down on a mat on the grass and invited Laius to sit next to him. Laius sat down next to him but said he could come in if he wanted to take a nap. Claude asked him to stay. The guy asked what Laius plans to do when Kieran returns. After all, the first heir gets everything and the rest nothing. Laius replied that he already had some plans for the future, and Claude offered to be his butler at the court of Ihar. This was an important leadership position. Leah was surprised by this proposal, because she thought that he hated her. But Laius told him that he would do what he wanted, and money was not important to him. Then Claude said not to talk nonsense and asked him to wake him up in an hour, not the servants. Leah admired him with his eyes closed. When Claude fell asleep, Leah stroked his hair and thought that with each such moment it would be more and more difficult for her to leave this place. It was late at night when Leah woke up in her bed. She called Pippi and asked what she was doing here. After all, she was on the street. Pippi replied that Leah fell asleep on the street and Mr. Claude had to carry her into the room in his arms. Pippi was very surprised by this, as was Leah herself. When Leah asked where he was, Pippi replied that he had already returned to the capital. And Pippi took Leah to bathe with new shampoos. The new shampoos smelled simply wonderful. Leah asked Pippi if she was heavy. Pippi replied that she was as light as a feather, and even lighter than she should be. Leah was worried that she had caused Mr. Claude a lot of inconvenience, and she is sure that next time he will say that she is too skinny for a man. To this, Pippi replied that she was worried about something else. After all, Leah has grown up and now it will be increasingly difficult to convince others that she is a man. Pippi asked how long she was going to hide because Mr. Kieran was already feeling better. Leah yelled at her that she was already going beyond the limits. But in fact, I thought that Pippi was right. And she remembered the words of Prince Ian, who soon wanted to see her as a guest, like Camelia. Camelia decided that if she wants to find her mother and get her life back, then she must make sure that these two, Ian and Claude, do not expose her. Kieran hugged Leah tightly and told her how she had grown up and become a real lady. Leah also said that he too had grown and changed. Mistress Anastasia told Laius that he had done well in their absence. She understood that the brothers wanted to catch up, but they needed to discuss something. Sitting in the room with Leah, Anastasia asked if she and her brother had communicated all these 4 years. Leah said no, but she believed Kieran was a caring brother. The lady said that she heard that Laius was leaving for the capital in 2 days. Laius replied that he was able to get a place at the academy, thanks to her kindness. Anastasia replied that Mr. Theodore spoke warmly of him. and the lady praised Camillus for his good work. She said that he was now worthy to be Kieran's brother. Anastasia asked if it was possible that Leah wanted to find her mother in the capital. Leah replied that she would find her no matter what. Anastasia said that she didn't understand, since she has already entered high society, and all the nobles know her as Camillus. And she can't just show up as a girl. Leah's task is to live in the shadows, as they agreed. Anastasia had one plan. The lady said there was one way to find her mother, but we can't rush and it will take some time. Therefore, he will go to the academy. And then, when everyone starts to forget about him, they will hold a funeral for Camillus Bale, and she can return to Camillia's life again. Leah was very surprised, and Anastasia told her that she just wanted to fulfill the promise she made to her when she brought her here. The girl played her role even better than she expected. Kieran recovered thanks to her. Therefore, Anastasia wants to thank her in this way. And yet she allowed Laius to attend Kieran's engagement. After this, he will return to Gayor again. He is so hungry for knowledge. Then Leah asked for a favor. Forgive her mother. Forgive me? What a cheeky request. How dare you ask for this? Asked Anastasia. Sassy? If asking for forgiveness is impudent, then what were those 4 years that I lived as a man for? I agreed to live like Camillus in order to earn my mother's forgiveness, so please forgive us finally, Leah asked. That's enough, Mom. Funeral for the living? Camilla is a member of House Bale by blood. She is also part of our family. Kieran defended Leah. Anastasia laughed and told Kieran that Camillus came to their family just for him. And now it is of little use, and unnecessary things need to be thrown away. You are a disgrace to the House of Bale, Mother, Kieran said. Mrs. Anastasia was indignant. How dare he talk to her like that? Leah headed out of the room and her brother called her Camilla, and she replied that her name was Camillus and left the room. Camilla sat in front of the pool and cried. She didn't understand how Mrs. Anastasia could come up with such a thing. Funeral? After all, these 4 years that she spent as Camillus were not all lies, and she will never be able to return here after leaving for the capital. But why was she so attached to this place? Not now, Pippi, I want to be alone, Leah said to the one who approached her. I see you are still not a girl, Prince Ian told her. Glad to see you again, Camilla. Why are you crying? He continued as she turned around. Thank God, Marilyn, you went, Her Highness said at a banquet in the palace. Marilyn Shelby thanked her for her concern. Then Marilyn noticed Claude and greeted him. The girl wanted to thank him for visiting her when she was unconscious, but Claude was cold and said that it was time for him to leave, since they had already met. Marilyn replied that the reception had not even started yet. Then the guy said that he needed to visit Kieran. Although the girl didn't like it, he asked for forgiveness and took his leave. As Prince Ian and Claude were riding in the car, Ian informed Claude that Kieran had returned with a guest. Third son of King Lewin. Mad Dog of War. The guys discussed that these savages from Gayor could not be trusted. If he is at all like his father, then that means he takes whatever he wants. The prince was surprised that Kieran was hanging out with someone like Ian. But Claude replied that it was Ian who protected Kieran when he was in Gayora. Wade was angry and so was Claude. After all, you cannot communicate with the enemy. Claude replied that Kieran was also a nobleman and knew what he was doing. And yet this does not change the fact that Kieran is dealing with an enemy prince. But if something happens to Ian Sergio while he is here, then war will be inevitable. Since due to the conflict over diamond mines in neutral territory, the stability of the region has been shaken. Camillus asked Prince Ian to stop pursuing him. He showed the prince where the banquet was taking place, but the prince said that he was here because of her, Camilla. When Laius was about to leave, he slipped and fell right into the arms of Prince Ian. He called him Camilla and she responded. Kieran called Leah and looked at Ian indignantly. He, after all, asked the prince to wait for him in the hall, and he came here to Leah. Ian replied that he was bored and decided to take a walk, and feeling a familiar smell, his feet themselves led him to Camilla. Kieran grimaced that Ian was following the scent like a dog, and he said that it was time for him to return to the hall. And he asked Leah if she had met the prince before. Leah replied that they were just having sherbet for dessert and he didn't bother her at all. In this case, it was time for them to go to the guests. It was the prince and the duke. Wade sat on the couch next to Claude. He said that he and Kieran would do this Sergio and he would look at the stars with his beloved Camillus. But Claude objected that His Highness needed to stay here to resolve all issues. Wade realized that Claude was worried about Laius. "I see you no longer treat him like a copy of your brother. An unexpected change of heart," Wade said to Claude, noticing his affection for Laius. Claude replied that his thoughts had not changed, he was just quite funny. And looking at Laius, his mood lifts. The guy told the prince how a couple of days ago he made him an offer to work as a butler in the Ihar house. But he refused. Wade asked if it bothered him so much that he would retaliate with humiliation until he got tired of it. Claude replied that on the contrary, now he wants him even more. Camillus is a work of art that Mrs. Anastasia worked so hard on. He is unique among all this rotten nobility. He is not at all like all these pigs hiding behind the titles of their fathers, who are nothing of themselves. Therefore, he wants to make it his own. Wade von Weisse and Claude de Ihar introduced themselves to Ian Sergio. Ian asked Claude if he was the ruler of Del Casa. Claude replied that his father was still in good health. Ian noticed that all the same, everything that belongs to his father will become his. Claude thanked him for looking after Kieran and Gaiora. Laius stood and wondered when this would all end and why he needed to be present. He was glad that Mrs. Anastasia would come now, and they would communicate without him. But when Prince Ian was called to go into another room, he said that he would be delayed because he needed to finish his conversation with Camillus. Everyone was surprised by this, and Claude said that His Highness was waiting for him, and Laius asked to postpone the conversation until later, since His Highness is much more important. But His Majesty, Ian Sergio said, "You are mistaken, Camillus, you are more important to me, you still haven't said why you cried?" Claude looked at them, not knowing what to do, and Kieran interrupted Ian with his stern look, and Ian told him that he was just teasing Laius. Then Claude invited everyone to enter the hall. Sitting at the table, Wade asked Mistress Anastasia if Camillus would join them. Anastasia replied that Laius had returned to his chambers and was not feeling well. Her long absence probably took its toll on him, and now she will make sure that he is looked after properly. But Claude did not understand her, because the prince said that he found Laius crying alone on the street. Claude thought that no one would want to eat in such an environment. "It looks like today he will eat only sweets again," he said out loud. Mrs. Anastasia, sitting nearby, heard this and asked what he meant. And Prince Ian put food on a plate and asked the maid to take it to Laius's room. "And he asked me to tell him that refusing food is harmful to health, but if his health worsens, he can always take him with him to Gaior." Mistress Anastasia was angry, and Kieran thanked him for his concern and said that they would remember his proposal just in case. But Kieran thought to himself that this place was not suitable for such a defenseless girl. Even Gaior looks like a fairy tale compared to this lion's den. Prince Ian said that in his opinion this place was not suitable for Laius, and he asked Claude what he thought. Claude was silent. Then Ian said that he meant venison. In Gaiora this dish is considered a delicacy, but Claude asked for forgiveness for his next words, which he was forced to say. "Meat from Gaior does not deserve a place on the imperial table. Appearance, how to say, I thought they brought me something rotten," Claude continued. Claude decided to end this squabble, and asked the lady for permission to join them later when the drinks were brought, and he went out for a walk along the corridor. The guy walked along the corridor and wondered if Camillus was avoiding him in order to have fun with the visiting savage. Suddenly, he noticed a maid with a tray. Then Claude stopped her and asked if this was food for Camillus. He asked to bring him sweets from the table instead of this food. The maid said that it was the prince who asked to bring him this food, and Claude asked if she wanted to feed him this slop from Gaior. Claude told her, "Let's take Camillus what he really likes." When they approached Laius's door with a bowl of sweets and knocked on the door, no one opened it. Standing outside were Betty and the rest of the maids with whom Leah had lived for 4 years. They said they decided to throw her a going-away party. Leah was pleased that all these people showed so much concern for her. They asked her not to forget about them when she reached the capital, and thanked her for her kindness to them. When Betty approached her, Leah hugged her tightly and asked her to promise that she would take care of herself after she left. Betty said that she had already instructed Pippi about her tasks, so they shouldn't have any difficulties. Leah thanked Betty for her concern. Betty also asked not to wander around at night and to be careful with strangers, especially those who would lure you with candy. They are the worst. And she asked me to be sure to find my mother. Leah sat at the table thinking that this was probably the last time she would see everyone here. Suddenly, the maid brought a vase of sweets, and behind her stood Mr. Claude. When Leah was younger, she thought of him as a typically arrogant nobleman. But there is not a single word that can describe Claude de Ijara. He's the type of person who makes you nervous out of fear of being ridiculed. Someone who sometimes likes to fool around. The one who smells like lavender. A mysterious man who shows kindness when you least expect it. But I'm no longer a little child who loves sweets, Leah thought, putting the candy in her mouth. The next morning, the maids said goodbye to Camellia on the street. Kieran came out to say goodbye and hugged Leah tightly. He asked forgiveness for his mother, who would not be able to go out. Kieran asked her not to take it to heart, and he reminded her that he would soon visit her in ether. "Okay, then I'll go," said Leah. Prince Sergio wanted to hug Leah's goodbye, but he was cold and said, "Take care of yourself." Ian asked why he hated him so much. Leas replied that this was not the case at all. Ian just puts him in an awkward position all the time. Leas wanted to get into the carriage, but Prince Wade was already sitting there. Since the prince felt very bad after the Gaior wine, he said that he was taking this carriage for himself and Leas would have to find another one. "Are you coming?" Claude asked Leas, standing near his car. Kieran suggested that Leas take up Claude's offer. After all, a car is much faster than a carriage, and Kieran promised it would be fun. And also Claude will be able to take care of him. These words made Ian laugh. "Shouldn't he be the first thing to worry about?" he said to Leas. But he replied that he did not understand what he was talking about. Then Ian grabbed Leah's hand and whispered in her ear, "All men are animals, Camellia, be careful." Leah was outraged by his words. Claude asked Leas to hurry up. As Leas boarded the carriage, apologizing for the delay, Claude said it was not his fault. But in fact, they are late because His Highness got drunk on this rubbish from Gaior. And since Laius was done with goodbyes, they left. Leas was shaking heavily from the fast ride. Claude held his hand. He asked if Leas was eating well since his arms were very thin. Leas replied that his stomach was like a bottomless pit, and those sweets that Monsieur Claude sent him were so sweet that his lips stuck together. Monsieur Claude brought his hand to his face and smelled it. He said he still smelled like candy, and they seemed to be sweeter than he thought. When Laios fell asleep in the car because of the long journey, Claude looked at him and thought that in all these years he had not changed at all. His smell attracted Claude so much. It seemed too sweet to him as for a man, and nothing about him looked like a man. Claude thought he was going crazy, and he kissed his lips. When Leah got out of the carriage, she thought that she must have hit her head when she was sleeping because her head hurt at the sight of the injury, and for some reason her lips were wet. She hoped she wasn't drooling in her sleep. They approached a beautiful house with flowers. Claude asked why Leos would live here and not in the dorm. He replied that his father was worried that he would not get used to the lifestyle in the hostel. "Someone like you would get the biggest room in the dorm," Claude told him. Leos replied that he is a rather private person. Then Claude remembered how calmly he behaved with the man he had just met. His shyness doesn't seem to extend to foreigners. When they were already inside the house, Claude asked why Leos did not stay at the house of the Marquise of Belle. He replied that this place was too big for him. But Claude didn't believe it and asked if there was another reason. Then they went up the stairs to Laios's room. She was beautiful. There was a wonderful view of the city from the window. And in Corsor there was nothing but forests and trees. Claude told him to enjoy it while he could. At night, the city becomes noisy. And he asked what the Marquis was thinking about, sending him here to live alone. Leos didn't understand why Claude was so upset that he wouldn't be living in the dorm. When leaving, Claude told Leos to eat less sweets and eat normally, at least once, otherwise he himself would soon turn into one big candy. What's wrong with him? Leah thought. She checked to see if he had really left by looking outside the door. And then she opened her closet with dresses and a wig. Mom will never recognize me if I look like a boy, Leah thought, holding the wig in her hands. But she was worried that she had changed so much that her mother still wouldn't recognize her. Claude sat in his pool and remembered that kiss. The driver also noticed this. Damn it, he's a man, Claude thought and covered his face with his hands. In the morning, standing at the window, Claude reflected that not only did Leos not look like a man, but he had settled in a place more suitable for a girl. He thought that his feeling was just ordinary curiosity, but his thoughts were interrupted by a maid who brought him a letter that was handed over from the palace. A few days before, when Camillus arrived at the academy, everyone was whispering behind his back about the fact that he is the youngest son of the Marquise, and about the fact that he doesn't look like a guy at all. He was met by a professor he already knew, and took him to the examination class. The professor praised Leos and said that he could not wait to find out his exam results. On the way to the office, they met Claude. He stood and did not look at Lias at all, as if he was looking up at him. And Lias did not understand what happened to him. When Lias entered the office, the guys in the corridor began to discuss and insult him, saying that he was a bastard born in a swamp. And how could Marquis Bale even dare to bring him to the academy? And then Claude interceded and said that they had no right to insult the son of the Marquis of Bale, the emperor's favorite, and they themselves are empty-headed sons of small counts. One of them said that he didn't mean to say anything bad. He just meant that Lias was an easy prey for all sorts of perverts. Claude was frightened by this phrase. As everyone gathered in the auditorium for Lias's examination, the director said that he expected great things from him. Claude did not like the director's behavior. Lias remembered his classes with the teacher, who said that the academy teaches society. That is, they study an ideal society in which people get what they deserve, and that a person's future does not depend on his social status. The academy also teaches mathematics and literature in order to understand how to build such a society. But, in fact, he was very uncomfortable at the academy, and this is not an entrance exam at all. For them, he is just a nobody, with rumors about his birth. And they don't care about his knowledge, they check what he should know as part of a noble family. They decide whether he is worthy to be part of it. This is what a famous academy consists of. He felt his expectations were too high. The exam time is up, and why did the director come over? He said he hoped Lias did the best he could, and he asked me to wait a little so they could check everything. Lias noticed that Claude was still there. The committee praised Lias for his excellent performance. He was the first to achieve a perfect score since Kieran Bale. It seems that this genius is in their blood. His Highness Wade praised Lias and said that he lived up to his reputation. And Lias replied that he just had a good memory. That's the whole secret. Prince Wade said that this is the most difficult thing. And he added that since he had a perfect score, he could choose which class to join. The director said that it would be possible to choose a hostel, but in his case it would not be useful. But it seems to him that 9th grade will suit Lias best. Lias asked if he should answer now, and the professor said that he had a week to do so and offered to give him a tour of the academy. But Claude suggested that he himself would give Lias a tour of the academy. The professor said it was unexpected, but Claude reminded him how long he had waited for Lias to enter the academy. Then Leah remembered how the professor persuaded his father and said that the Ihar house hoped to see Camelius at the academy as soon as possible. So it was true. Claude put his arm around Lias's waist and took him on a tour. Prince Ian, watching this, thought, well, but said nothing, just looked after them. Holding his hand, Claude led Lias outside, and he told him that Lias would not go to 9th grade. Lias was surprised because the director said that his knowledge was enough. Claude said that director Eddie Kirchman looked at him very suspiciously, and there are a lot of strange rumors about him. Is that all? Asked Lias in surprise. Don't you understand? Claude asked. But Lias told Claude that he was here as a student and he was not interested in gossip about professors. Looking back, Leah did not understand that her thoughts were too busy with an incomprehensible future. Her goal was to graduate as soon as possible. After all, when Kieran returns home and her mother is found, she will no longer be able to continue her studies here, and she didn't want to create even more problems. When Lias answered Claude, "What difference does it make what orientation the professor is? This doesn't apply to me in any way," Claude asked in surprise. "It doesn't apply then. Are you sure?" Then Lias asked to leave this topic and said that he would think about his words. Lias saw the hippodrome and began asking about the horses and the famous academy stables. Claude asked him not to change the topic and choose 8th grade. Since he won't be able to breathe if he chooses 9th grade, then he will sit at textbooks all year. Leah wondered why he didn't immediately explain everything to her about the class. When a horse approached them, Lias wanted to pet it, but Claude removed her hand, saying that the horse might bite. When Claude again saw his shiny lips, which were so inviting, he wants to kiss them. But he came to his senses in time and said that there was something on his face that needed to be removed. Claude noticed 2 guys in uniform approaching them. Then he asked Lias to go to his home straight along the road, and they would continue the excursion another time. The guys said that they had come to accompany Mr. Claude, since he received permission from His Majesty, but on the condition that his people join the city guard. This meant that the Emperor allowed him to conduct the investigation. Claude asked if they had found the culprit. His Majesty thinks that he could not go far and there is only one place. Lower. Claude has ordered that someone familiar with the area be found, and they will go investigate tonight. The guy thoughtfully stroked his horse. In the evening, near Camelia's house, Pippi asked if she could cope alone. Camelia was beautiful in a chic dress with long hair. Pippi was worried that it was dangerous for her to go out in such an outfit. People will immediately understand that she is not local. Leah replied that Pippi didn't know Lower as well as she did. Leah asked Pippi about her hair, whether it made her stand out too much. Pippi replied that they had not seen each other for too long, and she would not recognize her without them. Then Camelia thought that Pippi was right and told her, "I'll be back soon." The coachman gave her a lift and said, "Wait for me in the northern part until I return." He asked if she was familiar with the area. The girl replied that it was enough to survive. Leah recognized the place right there, around the corner, where she lived with her mother. Leah ran. The house was already so close. A guy came out from around the corner and she crashed into him and almost fell, but he caught her. It was Claude. "Camelius!" The first thing Claude thought and asked, looking into the girl's eyes. "Mr. Claude? But what is he doing here?" Leah thought. Leah covered her head with her hood and turned to leave. Claude apologized for confusing her with someone else. He thought that his eyes were already mocking him. Well, it can't be that this girl is Camelius. Then he asked her to tell her name, but she was silent. Leah thought he was too close to her and remained silent. Claude asked if she was mute, but then I thought that at least she could hear him. Claude offered to guide her if she was lost or needed help. After all, these streets are not a place for a lonely, beautiful lady. While Leah followed Claude, she noticed that he was leaving marks on the wall. The girl was wondering what to do now. He will guess immediately who she is. She decided to overtake him and go first. Claude realized that she was a local because she knew the road well. And the guy asked, "After all, she's not really dumb." Leah saw a carriage ahead and rushed forward. Claude ran after her. She paid the coachman and asked him to say that he dropped her off south of the Lion Bridge, in front of the statue of St. Matthew. When the carriage left, Claude ordered that the carriage crossing the bridge be found, adding that it seemed they had found someone who could guide them through the lower slums. Leah lay awake all night wondering if Claude recognized her. That place was very close, a few steps away, and they stopped her at such a bad time. Suddenly, Pippi ran into the room and said that Mr. Leus needed to get dressed urgently. He shouldn't be seen like that. After all, Mr. Claude arrived to them. When Leus came out into the living room, Claude was already sitting at the table. He said someone woke up late. Leus asked for forgiveness and said that he had trouble sleeping. Leus asked what brought Monsieur Claude to him at such an early time, and he asked Leus if he didn't know. Leus replied that he could not read minds. Claude asked Leus to have a proper breakfast since they had to visit a place. His brother Kieran asked to show him life in the imperial capital. When they were in the city center, Claude asked Leus to fill these streets. The beginning of all roads is measured from this building, the Cohen Bank. The guy said that since he was taken straight into the 9th year, it should be easy for him to remember the surroundings. Leus remembered this place from his lessons. The academy is 2.7 miles northeast, and the imperial palace is 3 miles from Cohen's Bank. Claude praised Leus for being a fast learner, but for some reason he had a strange feeling next to Leus. He became impulsive. He not only wanted to kiss him but also called the girl by his name. It was a terrible feeling and also inappropriate behavior for him. When they approached the river where the monument was visible, Leus said that all the people here looked so happy, and that life in Etera was probably very comfortable. But Claude replied that darkness always follows light. The stronger the light, the deeper the darkness, and you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Then Leus said that people living in darkness do not know that they are not in the light. And ignorance is bliss, he continued, looking at the slums on the other side of the river. Claude became interested and asked why Leus thought that. He replied that happiness is relative, and we always think that life is unfair only when we see those who are better than us. But if we remain naive from the very beginning, then all we will know is the life into which we were born, and it's not about meeting needs at all. Claude suggested that he break away from these sad thoughts and move on. He again gave him a jar of sweets and called him a child that he loved sweets. While Leus asked that Claude was not much older than him, the guy opened the carriage door and said that since he had seen the bright side, it was time to show the dark side in the slums of Lower. When they were already driving, Leos asked if they were really going to Lower and why, and Claude asked what he had heard about this place. Leos replied that it was better to stay away from him. Then Claude asked if he knew that Lower was located directly behind Lyon, which his windows overlooked. Leos thought that he needed to answer something so that he would not be found out. "Is that so? And I was wondering why that side of the river is always darker at night, and I had no idea." "So this is Lower?" answered Leos. When they got out of the carriage, Claude said that Lower was the folly and shame of the empire, a thorn in the heavenly garden. Leah thought he suspected something, and thus tests Leos, but he must not take the bait. That's why Leos said that he felt sick just from the smell of this place. Leos asked to leave, but Claude said that he would have to be patient. After all, for them this is an ordinary landfill, but for someone this place is called home. The bright light of the city cast a large shadow over this place. Leah did not agree, but forced herself to remain silent so as not to give herself away. Leos very much asked Claude to return him home, because this place scares him very much, and Claude agreed to take him home. As they rode in the carriage, Claude apologized to Camillus for being shocked by the place. For some reason, he decided that Leos already knew him. But Leos said it was his first time here, and Leah hoped that Claude believed in this legend because it was difficult to understand from his face. Leos occasionally glanced at Claude. Claude told Leos that he would take him home first, and then he had an appointment for dinner. Leos replied that they would have to hurry then, and Claude was offended, because he expected a different answer from him. It seemed to him that Leos always looked happy when he had to leave. But Leos replied that this was not so, and that he would be happy to have dinner with him that evening. Then Claude said that he could reschedule his meeting for another day. "You can't, it would be very rude of you," Leos replied. They wanted to say goodbye, standing near Camillus's house. But Claude noticed a white horse near the house and told Camillus that it looked like he had guests, and apparently named, as Claude believed. When they entered the house, they saw Prince Ian Sergio arriving from Gyor. He was lying on the sofa and, as always, was happy to see Camilla. Leos reminded Claude that he was rushing to a meeting, and Claude said that it would be better for His Highness to stay at his estate in the capital. But Camillus objected. "After all, Prince Ian is a guest of the Bale House, and that would be wrong. So you'll let him stay alone with you?" Claude asked and took his candy jar. Camillus asked him which gentleman takes his gifts back, and Claude replied that he didn't want him to smell like candy. Ian came very close to Leos and whispered, "Camillus, forget about sweets and eat normally. I've been waiting for you all day and I'm very hungry." Leos reprimanded Ian that he was too close. "I will treat you, Your Highness. Camillus arrived in the capital quite recently. I will be the best guide for you," said Claude. "But still, I prefer Camillus's company," said Ian. But Claude insisted that he would be safer accompanied by him. After all, this is the capital of another state. Prince Ian said that Claude was right. But since he was very tired from the long journey, he would spend the rest of the day here, resting with Camillus. This means that he won't go anywhere. But it's time for Lord Claude to leave. Claude didn't know what else to say, so he went to the meeting. The gentleman said that he no longer thought that Mr. Claude would be able to honor them with his visit, but he still came. Claude asked for forgiveness and said that he had some business to attend to. The man asked if Claude's father was still surrounded on neutral territory, and it would be an honor to receive the Grand Duke here in the imperial capital. Claude replied that his father had no plans to pay a visit yet. "The security of the empire depends on the north, and my father is a very pragmatic person." Then the gentleman got to the point and said that his daughter had recently gotten engaged, and they were thinking of holding her wedding after the marriage ceremony of Princess Rosina and Mr. Kieran Bale. When Claude imagined Camillus next to this girl, he felt uneasy, but he said that he would definitely notify his father about this, and happy events should be celebrated together. The owner of the house said that he never stops thinking about what could have delayed Mr. Claude, because he is always so punctual. Claude replied that there were matters that still required his attention, and he asked for forgiveness because it was time for him to leave them. When the coachman asked Monsieur Claude where to take him, he immediately said to Camillus, and then he corrected himself, saying to go to the estate. He couldn't get rid of the memory of how Leos separated him from Ian and said, "Mr. Claude, the prince will stay in the Bale House, period." Claude didn't like the fact that Leos called Ian by his first name, and he was worried that this damned prince had some kind of unhealthy interest in Camillus. Otherwise, he wouldn't. His thoughts were interrupted by a message from a guy in uniform. Mr. Claude, we found her. That night only one dark green carriage crossed the bridge. According to the cab driver, the passenger got off at the statue of St. Matthew. It was a girl in an expensive robe. Claude wondered if something was wrong here. He knew that the only estate in that area belonged to the house of Ihar. But since they did not receive guests that night, this meant that the cabman had lied. Is the problem with these candies? Leah thought, looking at the jar. Prince Ian, sitting on the sofa, insisted that Leos eat something other than these sweets. Leah offered the prince one piece of candy and put it in his mouth. Ian deliberately licked her hand. This was inappropriate behavior for a member of the royal family. Leos said that it was time for him to return to his chambers, and His Highness could move to their family estate as soon as he rested. But the prince insisted that he wanted to talk to Leah one-on-one, because they did not have such an opportunity. She replied that she had nothing to tell him, but still, he persuaded her to sit next to her on the sofa and asked if Claude knew that she was a girl. Leah replied that even the walls have eyes and ears, and she was uncomfortable with this conversation. Ian asked how long Leah planned to continue this masquerade. The girl replied that she did not know. Then the prince got down to business. His father wants him to find a wife among the nobility of the Cayenne Empire. Marriage is the best way to establish diplomatic relations. Leah said that if he needed advice, she didn't know any suitable ladies. But Prince Ian said he didn't need advice. Then Leah didn't understand what he wanted. Your father, Marquis Bale, is an imperial nobleman, and I'm going to officially ask him for your hand in marriage. Ian stunned her. Leah objected that she was a man, but the prince knew very well that she was a woman. He was already dreaming that they would hold the ceremony next year, and also that she can make her formal debut before the wedding ceremony as Camellia Bale and return to her real self. Prince Ian, Leah exclaimed. What? Have you already given your heart to someone else? Let me guess. Claude de Ishar? Asked Ian. Don't rush, we have a whole year, think it over carefully. I can save you from that witch you call mother. Leah replied that this was not necessary. Ian thought she would be delighted and asked if she didn't want to be a girl again. Leah replied that she was not a real noblewoman, and it will be right to leave everything behind when this is over. Ian asked her again how long she planned to live a lie. Leah didn't want to continue this conversation. Leah asked how he could ask for her hand in marriage if they had only met 3 times. Ian replied, Okay, then there will be a funeral. The girl asked if he overheard their conversation with Anastasia, and Ian replied that she was very harsh and loud, and many people heard their conversation then. But Leah replied that the idea of marriage did not suit her. She doesn't want to participate in these political games, and she asked not to involve her in diplomacy and alliances. Then Prince Ian told her that not everything is as complicated as it sounds, and he just fell in love with her, that's all. Camellia was surprised. The prince repeated that they would have a whole year to get to know each other better, and he said that he would wait for her answer until next year. Ian also told Leah that Kieran was returning in 10 days, so they will have 10 whole happy days alone with each other. The next day, going to the academy, Leah remembered Ian's words that they would be together for 10 whole days, and she mentally asked Kieran to come back as soon as possible. Suddenly, she was called out by Lord Thorin, the guy who insulted her to Claude. Leas greeted him, and he said that he expected to see Kieran Bale, and not a useless imposter. Lias replied that his brother had no intention of returning to the academy. Thorin laughed at the fact that Kieran had spent 4 years in Gyora and had already defected. Then Thorin said that Kieran probably knows that only graduates of the academy can claim noble titles. Oh, you didn't hear? Kieran already graduated 4 years ago, Lias told him with a smile. Lias laughed at the fact that Thorin was not up to date with the latest events. And this is not surprising because it is easy to miss something without having friends sharing the news. Thorin was offended by this and decided to say something offensive. He said that everyone knows that Leos got into the academy because of his cute face. And since he is only a first year, he is not stupid enough to make enemies for himself. You don't want to disgrace your father's good name? You already know it. You are a disgrace to the house of the Bales, Thorin whispered to Leos. Leos clenched his hand into a fist. Lias pulled himself together and said in a calm tone, Lord Thorin, you continue to look down on the one the Marquis recognized. How dare such a nameless family as yours discredit the name of the Marquis? You were brave enough to say his name, but stupid enough to make such a powerful enemy as the Marquis Bale. And don't forget that I'm not a first-year student like you, And I'm in my 9th year of study, added Laius. He also asked the surprised Thorin not to come into his sight again. Leah became sad. She wondered when she became like this. Yes, she understood that this was the best way to deal with such people. But what to do? She got carried away and told this idiot everything about the 9th grade, and everyone around was already whispering about it. Leah thought that Claude would definitely give her a beating for this. As they sat in the office, the professor told Laius that he knew he would choose 9th grade, and it is a great honor for the academy to train such an outstanding student, right after his brother. Laius asked the professor if he could tell him why the officer was there. Was it because he had a row with Lord Thorin on the street? The officer asked Laius, "Sir, is this your natural voice? Do you know how to protect yourself? Do you know how to handle a dagger?" Laius did not raise the purpose of these questions, and the professor told the officer that he couldn't find a better candidate, and the officer agreed with him. "Mr. Bale, I am here to ask for your cooperation on behalf of the city guard," the officer continued. "This may put you in a difficult situation, but the lives of the townspeople are at stake, and I'm sure you will do what's right. We are looking for a man who can pretend to be a noble lady," the officer concluded. Laius didn't know what to answer to this. Sitting in a cafe on the street, Laius was thinking about refusing the officer's offer. But he remembered everything the officer told him, that a criminal attacks noblewomen, and the parents are so scared that they won't give up their daughter as bait. They need to catch the criminal as soon as possible. He will need to appear in the library, theater, station, mainly near attractions around Lower. And Laius is the one they were looking for. Leah had already decided that she would refuse the officer's application, when suddenly she saw a woman passing by on a cart. It was her mother. The girl immediately ran after the cart and shouted for the driver to stop, and she called for her mother. She was unable to catch up with her, but Leah knew for sure that it was her mother. And she was so close. Claude drank tea with the officer and asked him if Camillus agreed. The officer replied that he had not yet, but most likely he would agree. "Pretend to be a woman? Who came up with such an absurd idea?" asked Claude. The officer responded that apprehending the criminal was their top priority, but Claude was against it and said that this was the beloved brother of his best friend, and if even one hair falls from his head, they will all pay for it. There was a knock on the door and they were informed that the man they had been waiting for had arrived. Camillus entered the office and gave his consent to the undercover case. Then Laius noticed Mr. Claude in the office. Well, Claude got up and left, ignoring Laius. He told the officer that he had to go to a meeting. The officer told Laius that Mr. Claude did not like their idea. Laius asked if he was aware of their business. The man was surprised that Laius didn't know, because they were friends. The officer replied that Monsieur Claude had supplied them with sufficient men for this investigation, so that he had been aware of the matter from the very beginning. The officer then asked if Laius knew Ms. Marilyn Shelby. After all, it was she who recommended his candidacy for this matter, and she looks forward to meeting him soon. But not now, of course, and 4 days later at the Shelby estate. Leah was very surprised by this. Claude stood in the street, stroking his horse. He wondered if Laius had actually agreed to this investigation. And why did it bother him so much? Prince Wade rode up to Monsieur Claude on his horse. He told him the news that Laius had entered his 9th year of study, and about the fact that he disgraced Lord Thorin in a verbal conversation. Wade told Claude that this Camillus is a very interesting guy. Claude said that Lord Thorin simply got what he deserved. Prince Wade asked, "Is that all? Just wondering if you and I share the same preferences?" The same preferences. This phrase never left Claude's head.